So welcome to Ariel's AMA session with today's topic of can AI technology enhance authentic connections and influence virtual settings? I'll tell you that I personally am very excited. When we released that we will be having this session, that week in particular, I saw all of this new trend of AI photos and AI communication, and it's just been a really hot topic. So we're excited to dive more into it. Today, we're going to answer all the questions that you all have submitted, or we'll get to the ones that we can. And of course, we'll send you some post follow-up information as well for some of the things that maybe we don't get to. For those of you who've joined our previous AMA sessions, I'd like to say it's nice to see you again. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name is Jay Harris. I am a Vice President of Solution Strategy and a facilitator at Ariel. And I'm delighted to be here with our guest, Rachel Cossar. She is the CEO and co-founder of Virtual Sapiens, and she'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But for the next half hour, Rachel and I will be answering the questions that you've submitted about AI technology and what it could mean for you, for your team, and for your company. Also, I would like to mention, don't worry if you weren't able to submit your questions prior to the event. We will be monitoring your questions in the chat and responding to the best of our ability. This will be a recorded session as well, so we'll be sending this out afterwards. Please feel free to share it with others and just use it as a reference. But before we hop right into the questions, I'd like to say, welcome, Rachel. Can you share a little bit more about yourself and who Virtual Sapiens is?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a total pleasure to get to dive into this very hot topic altogether. So my background is as a professional ballet dancer turned facilitator for Ariel and a business that I used to run in my own right. And at Virtual Sapiens, what we're doing is basically leveraging some of these cutting edge technologies to introduce some more personalized scale capabilities with some of this coaching component around communication. So we use AI to help professionals assess, improve, and ultimately master some of the tenets of communication that are critical to connection and communication over video.
Nice, nice, awesome. I will say that I've had the opportunity to participate as someone that used your VPA assessment, your virtual presence assessment, and although I consider myself a semi-guru, I was surprised at some of the things that I found. So I think it'll be interesting once we give people the opportunity to try it on as well. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for spending this time with us. I want to start with, I mentioned earlier, we keep hearing AI everywhere. It's trending. What is AI? But I want to ask you, in your terms, what is AI and what does this term actually mean?
Definitely. So AI 100%, especially in the past year, it feels like has become a buzzword. And if any company can slap the letters AI onto their website, it's like an immediate jump, right? So I think it's helpful not to get into any of the nitty-gritty details around this, but just to understand that artificial intelligence encompasses any kind of technology that has been trained through some kind of machine learning, right? It's had some kind of initial training, which typically is through humans labeling images or words, and the algorithm and machine learning some of the logical sequences and flows, and then sending or setting this AI up to function on its own and to make decisions and judgments about different behaviors or what words should follow if, and, or but in real time. And so when you see AI, it's often helpful to understand what component is actually artificial intelligence and maybe what may be just automated technology, right? Which is a different thing entirely.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I hear you say things like think for itself or it knowing what to come next, which reminds me of this next question that stood out to me that someone submitted. And it's basically, there's this thought of, oh no, AI is going to replace us, or AI is going to take the place of our jobs, and what are we going to do? So one of the questions that came in that I'd like to ask you is, what can AI offer that maybe we can't, and what can we do to work alongside it in tandem?
Great question. I love this question. And of course, I understand a lot of the apprehension and the fear around this technology, which, depending on how you've experienced it, can appear hyper intelligent and very human-like in a way that is unsettling. But where we are currently with AI applications and the way it's being used across the board, and definitely at a company like Virtual Sapiens, AI is really good at taking certain automatable, repeatable tasks off of our hands, right? If we think about AI in the coaching space, what AI is not going to do is replace the coach, right? Like, the AI is not really nuanced and specific enough to be able to understand very specific details that are context-based or idiosyncratic to that person who's communicating and to the person who's their audience. But what the AI can do is provide amazing ways to track progress and establish a baseline. And then, as the coach is interacting with the coachee, follow that progress as a narrative over time and to be used as a reinforcement tool, right? So it's almost like a democratizing effect that AI can have by taking some of these repeatable tasks or tasks that need constant reminders and nudges that, you may not be able to hire a coach to be with you every day, being like, hey, remember we talked about this, remember we talked about that, but AI can be trained to do some of that work.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating, and definitely an evolution in terms of the coaching world and the coaching aspect. And it reminds me of, with coaching, something that we know as coaches and we hear a lot is building that trust, building that relationship where the coachee feels that they can trust the coach and they can trust the technology, they can trust the resources and materials that you're offering to them when it comes to coaching. So this next question that I wanted to ask you is along those lines. And someone wrote in and they said, how does AI analyze emotion, and how can it gauge trust in a relationship?
Yes, so those are great questions. I'm like a stickler for semantics, right? So when I hear, how does AI detect emotions? There's a difference between a felt emotion, a felt sense of something, and an expressed emotion, right? And at Ariel, we do a lot of work helping our coachees understand that, the intention and the way that you express has to be aligned with that, the way it's coming across, so that everything falls into place and you're effective as a communicator. So what AI does and can do well is detect expressions, right? So AI can be like, oh, that is a smile, that is a frown, that, that person may look this way or that way. But what I don't feel AI does very, very well, and I don't think humans always do a very good job at this either, is being able to detect an emotion, right? Because what you may be feeling is maybe not what is actually being expressed, right? So I think in AI in particular, we all have to be very careful about the way we interpret results. And at Virtual Sapiens, for example, when we look at facial expressions, we're not counting smiles. We're not going to tell someone, you look really angry. But what we will be looking for is different changes in your facial expression. So we call it facial expression variation, because what we want to encourage people is not necessarily to smile more, because that might not be relevant to the context, but we do want to encourage people to use their facial expressions, right? And so when it comes to measuring things like trust, I mean, trust is such a huge, meaty concept. And so there are many ways that it could be measured through AI. At Virtual Sapiens, we look at certain visual behaviors or nonverbal cues that are conducive to elevating perceived trustworthiness, right? So things like showing your hands once in a while, making sure that when someone's talking, you're paying attention, you're looking at them, and you're not looking away, because this can cause distrust because it looks like I'm distracted, right? If I'm listening to you. So we approach trustworthiness from the visual nonverbal behavior perspective, but it can also be measured by does this person consistently show up to meetings on time?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
trust comes from specific behaviors that are repeated so you can depend on them. So I think you could get really creative with the way AI might measure something like that, but you do have to be specific with what you're trying to execute on and
Mhm.
make sure that's clear to the person who's going to then be receiving the feedback.
It's interesting because it sounds like essentially what's happening is you are programming the AI to follow the science of emotion and follow the science of what it means to be expressive. Like you said, you're not counting how many smiles, but you are paying attention to the variation of movements and facial expressions, which I think is really cool. J.W. Womack said, a felt versus expressed emotion, because you mentioned this in your answer, and he or she says this is critical to understand and communicate, which I absolutely agree. It's interesting. I actually used the VPA. I mentioned this earlier. I took the virtual presence assessment. What I think is really unique about it and really cool about it, on top of using technology to analyze one's presence in the virtual space, is that not only is it analyzing you when you're talking, but it's also analyzing how you listen if you are paying attention. I will be transparent with you, Rachel, and tell you that I did not realize that when I wasn't talking, it was still paying attention. So I was popping popcorn, eating it, just enjoying my life. And then I realized at the end, oh, wow, the scores reflect that he may have been eating in between the questions and the answers. So I think it's really cool how it captures that. And I think it really gives us some insight about how we can show up better in the virtual space. So
Mm.
I have another question here from one of our participants. It says, when it comes to communication, does AI enhance or detract from authenticity?
And honestly, these are great questions. Authenticity is one of my favorite topics to cover in any kind of coaching or training environment, whether it's human to human or AI to human. And the reason for that is, our authentic selves evolve over time.
Mm.
And sometimes we confuse authenticity with our comfort zone. And if you're being coached or you're learning a new skill, like there will always be this period of like, wow, this doesn't feel like me, like the me I know and I'm most familiar with, right? But that doesn't necessarily make it bad. I think AI in its capacity to help reinforce training, to help rewire behaviors as a result of consistent personalized nudges over time, can certainly help you bring out that whatever new authenticity or authenticity you want to make sure is being communicated more clearly. But it has to be used very intentionally, right? Because what we don't want to have happen with AI in a use case or application like this is, again, like going back to that example of, oh, this machine said that I only smiled once, and so I scored really poorly on facial expressions. So now I'm going to show up to this next meeting and just make sure I smile a lot. And like all of a sudden it's the opposite of authentic, right? So when at Virtual Sapiens, when we think about providing people with feedback, we try very hard to give people personalized, actionable feedback with a range of interpretation.
Mhm.
Right? We want people to see the feedback and say, okay, let me reflect on that. Let me check in with my coach and be like, what do you think? Like, what are my options here? Like, I do want to make sure I'm not showing up with zero facial expressions, because this can be considered negative and it's hard for people to know where I'm at, what I think, and what I might feel of something, right? So like, what are my options? What can I practice with? And then you could try the tool again and see how the tool reacts to your changes, right? So
Mhm.
it's a conversation.
I got you. A conversation. It's interesting because you mentioned how, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, how you can use this as an add-on or as a supplement, I should say, with your coach. And we talked about earlier how when it comes to coaching, the basis of it is relationship, and that involves conversation. So I like how you talk about weaving the virtual aspect into that conversation, which I think is really good. I have a live question here, and it says, at Virtual Sapiens, what data, images, video do you use for training nonverbal, physical, nonverbal and physical cues, and that is coming from Jeff Korn.
Yes, a great question. And I think this is a question that really does need to be asked of any company that's using AI to provide feedback or support you in any way. At Virtual Sapiens, because we're a computer vision based company, which means that, we're not just looking at what you're saying, but we're really looking at the way you're showing up in real time on video. We made certain decisions to help protect the individual's privacy and data. So we don't, again, not to get too technical, but the way we analyze you in real time is by analyzing your web stream. So when you're using our product, we're not recording your video. Some tools out there will record your video, send your video to their servers, right? Which means that your video is leaving your device and going to a server, which hopefully, of course, is very private and secure, but it's an extra element, right? We record fully in real time or analyze fully in real time, don't record, and then give you your results after the fact. So while with our tool, no one will be able to review your recording. Like, we can't see anyone, even as like super admins. Your coach won't be able to see your recording and you won't be able to see your video, but you'll get the feedback and you'll be able to take that assessment as many times as you like. So we don't ever record, store, or transmit video. We just added some transcription features, which we're excited about because it helps round out the product. And the transcription, we now provide people with the option to save that and review it. And, we can analyze filler words, et cetera. But yeah, we try to keep everything as private to the user as possible, so that people don't feel like they're possibly being judged or observed by kind of more in that big brother sense.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say, as someone who did not realize that I was being analyzed while listening, I'm thankful that you don't save those recordings and that they don't go off into other spaces. And Jeff, I see your hand. I want to get to this, and I'll get to you. I want to get to this next question here from David Hall, who says, can AI watch multiple participants in a virtual meeting, for example, the speaker and a listener, gain insights into empathy as well?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, we don't do that at Virtual Sapiens currently from a commercial perspective, but we have played around with that, right? So you could, for example, I think, you'll see it already. I'm sure almost everyone on this call has been on a Zoom or Teams meeting where a bot joins, right? Mm-hmm. That bot is listening to everyone and analyzing speaker share. It's analyzing sentiments, which some people will say it's based on how people are showing up physically. I'm not convinced. I think it's mostly based on the sentiment of the word choice. Mm-hmm. We decided not to go down that route for a number of reasons at Virtual Sapiens. We wanted to focus on, giving the user coaching based on their explicit consent. But it's certainly possible. It's a little bit of a tricky space.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how I've seen, you mentioned like when the bot joins, and it's interesting how maybe you may be on a website and automatically you get a pop-up from a bot or an AI rep. It's not an actual rep, but they're starting to ask you questions and have a full conversation with you regarding, what your interests are, what brought you to the site, which I think is also interesting. And I'm seeing more across the board. So thank you both, Jeff and David, for your questions. I have another question here that I did want to ask from one of our participants that says, how can AI reduce the need for so many meetings with so many stakeholders?
That's an interesting question. So I've seen a couple of applications of AI where a team will use this AI and have the bot join every single meeting and then provide a score for the engagement level of that meeting that would be based on which participants said something, What was the overall sentiment, and however it is that they calculate engagement, they'll give an engagement score for the meeting, and then they'll be able to report out on that and say, these meetings were a 30% engagement level. Maybe they don't need to be meetings. Maybe that could have been an email. Maybe it could have been an asynchronous video. These meetings were like 75% and above engagement. Like, that was a great use of everyone's time. That's one example where you could use AI pretty effectively to at least notice patterns, right? I think the other thing to remember with AI is that AI is mandated, right, to notice different patterns and then make judgments accordingly. And it's in one of its strongest cases, AI can provide you with data and patterns that would be almost impossible for a human to detect in real time without hours and hours of analysis. And you can then interpret those and decide what to do.
That's good. I have one more live question that I wanted to get to. Someone asked the question, how can AI help us show up better when presenting to stakeholders and clients?
A number of ways. I mean, of course, a tool like Virtual Sapiens is designed to help people develop greater self-awareness, understanding of the tenets of virtual presence and influence, and then to practice them, right? I would say, where AI can really enhance your practice is in not necessarily always needing to find a buddy or someone to watch you present, or even to review your own recording. You can run through your presentation leveraging AI similar to Virtual Sapiens and get some pretty granular feedback on not only that one presentation, but how that presentation is evolving as you practice. I think, there are, like at Virtual Sapiens, we look at things like hand gestures, facial expression, as I mentioned, eye gaze, posture, face touching, tone, speech speed, filler words. So depending on what aspect of your presentation you're looking to refine, there are other tools that look specifically at what you said, at the content, and can help you determine whether you're being persuasive enough, clear enough with your words, et cetera. So I think that's a great use case for AI. Again, if the feedback is delivered in such a way that you can interpret it in a way that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting point, and I'll say that the way we've used it with other participants with our clients at Ariel, it's fascinating, where we give them this virtual presence assessment at the beginning of, or before the course even begins, and kind of analyze their presence, and then we go through the program where we're talking about how to amplify your presence, especially in the virtual realm. And then to take the assessment again, it's interesting to see the leaps and bounds that it has on their presentation, and how it affects the way that they show up. And that's another buzzword that we hear, show up, how they show up in that virtual space. And I love how the assessment prompts that development, and nudges them in that direction. And then I have one more question that we will take here, and it says, curious about any new ideas for L&D professionals and providing solutions for our stakeholders in the AI space.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, there's a lot, as you can imagine. I think in general, if you're assessing these tools and you're interested in bringing on some AI functionality, I think things that can be particularly effective in this realm are any tools that you can use to personalize your employees' experience, especially within that kind of onboarding stage where everything feels so new, and we are used to pretty static onboarding experiences, right? Like AI gives you the opportunity to make something feel like it was made for me. Now, specific tools that can support that, honestly, I would have to do a little bit more of an audit, but Virtual Sapiens presence assessment is amazing. And it's a great way to help people feel comfortable on video. But tools like even leveraging an email tool right? Like lavender.ai can be really helpful in crafting emails that are personalized, even just to the tone, to each specific person, So I think things like that bear researching into.
Nice, nice. Thank you. And then I see where in our live questions, Jeff had a follow-up question that says, I was curious to hear about how they train in asterisks, the AI. What data do they feed into the system to teach it?
Yes. So again, I've been focusing more so on AI and its application of, as a coach and at Virtual Sapiens. And the AI that we use has been trained extensively on hundreds of thousands of images of humans, different dynamic images of humans across different races, ethnicities, so that we can ensure that when we see a human, whether it doesn't matter if it's like where the person's from, what the person's ethnic background is, we know that, yes, that is a human, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you've been following the AI narrative at all over the past decade, you'll know that that wasn't always the case, that sometimes it would not recognize that a person of a certain skin tone was a human, right? Mm-hmm. So that is a big problem. In the past, we have trained that out of it. Generative AI, right, which we haven't really mentioned today, but ChatGPT, for example, that is trained on a broad swath of what's generally publicly available on the internet, right? So whether it's Reddit or Wikipedia or different people's publications that they've put up publicly. Mm-hmm. The really interesting thing to note about ChatGPT and other generative AI publicly trained AI models is that those are trained in an iterative process. So you have to be careful in knowing that anything you put into the system is training the system also, right? Mm-hmm. And the way you interact with the system is training it. So recently, there was some discovery around, sales teams who were using ChatGPT to create these emails and send out emails, and you're contributing to the global body of training that mm-hmm. ChatGPT is built on. So it depends on the AI. Some people develop their own models of training. There are open source models, right? That's what we use because those are pretty rigorous in their diversity. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does pique my interest with all that is involved. And I feel like, throughout our session today, we've only, cracked open the top of the egg in terms of all that is possible and available with AI. But thank you so much, Rachel, for providing us with that insight. And I do want to let our participants know that we will be following up via email in a few days after our session with a promo so that you will be able to actually try on the virtual presence assessment that Virtual Sapiens offers. So you don't just get to hear about it, but you get to experience it. And I think that you will be just as impressed as I was and a lot of our participants are. So again, thank you so much, Rachel, for being here and giving us this insight. And thank all of you for submitting your questions. And thank you for showing up to our session today. Again, this was recorded and we will send out the recording following our session in the days to come. So thank you so much and have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining.